You're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam, streaming on iTunes, Google Podcasts, and at DCAUreview.com. Now, here's today's episode.
Hey everyone, it is episode 31 of the DCAU Review. I am your host, or co-host, Cal, and alongside me, as always, my co-host, good brother, and the DCAU Twitter guru, it's Liam. Liam, welcome to episode 31.
Yeah, I'm excited. We had an interesting episode today. We're continuing on in our looking at the first few episodes of Justice League and sort of begin to expand that larger DCAU. We get to see Oa, the Green Lantern Corps, and a bunch of other stuff that we saw a little bit of that in Superman the Animated Series, but sort of an episode completely focused on that stuff is pretty cool to see.
Yeah, it's interesting, and we started our review of the Justice League last week with Secret Origin, so we continue this. This week is a heavy episode centered on characters that weren't really fleshed out or explored in the other episodes, and really what didn't really get touched on a whole lot in Secret Origin. So it's kind of cool. You get to learn a little bit of the backstory of one of your main characters, Green Lantern, and he's certainly a focus of many episodes. I feel on this series. It was very much a John Stewart story, and so it's interesting for sure. Let's jump into plot. We'll discuss that. So your plot is that, and it's, I don't know. We talked about this before we went on. It's interesting because you really don't understand. You don't see the full picture of what the plot is until almost to the end of the first episode, the first part, where we find out that John Stewart is the Green Lantern who was chasing after a space pirate and inadvertently caused the death of 3 billion people. Whoopsie. So because of that, he's being placed on trial. And there's all this kind of mystery surrounding it and why he didn't go without a fight. And I don't know. What are your thoughts? What were some of your thoughts on the plot?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, the end of part 1 is the big reveal where John Stewart basically pleads guilty to having inadvertently or accidentally destroyed an entire planet.
While he was trying to do something good, he was stopping this guy Kanjar-O, who was a cool little cameo because he's a pretty big, famous villain in the Justice League history. So it was cool. He doesn't get much of a flesh out here, but he was a cool little nod to some Justice League history. Yeah,
and so we find out that John's basically pleading guilty. He's not going to defend himself. But that's all that leads into the end of part 1 is literally John saying, "I'm guilty." So we have to cram a whole lot into part 2. We have to get the whole trial as the Flash tries to sort of valiantly buy time.
Comedic relief also.
Right, and get some comic relief in there. Hawkgirl has a little spat with the rest of the Green Lantern Corps, who is sort of, came to the trial, but sort of very quickly turned their backs on John and have decided he's definitely guilty, and they feel embarrassed by him. And meanwhile, Superman and the Martian Manhunter are investigating, and they eventually uncover that it is, of course, a ruse, and because this moon is still orbiting a planet that doesn't exist anymore. Which begs the question, did the Green Lantern Corps not investigate this situation?
It's a cutthroat corps there. They're
did the police of that sector not look into it very deeply?
They just assumed that they were all dead. That's why.
Yeah, I guess so.
They were blown into bits.
So they have to jam. So they jam that, the reveal that he's still alive, and then Superman has to rush in and save the Flash and Green Lantern from being gassed to death. Another gassing death here. We had that in the late Mr. Kent here. Apparently that's the go-to DCAU corporal punishment, is gas chambers. But
that's what Martian Manhunter did to the White Martians.
That's
and
right.
How he defeated them in the original.
That's gas. That's what we do.
On Mars. That's right.
But anyway, and then you have to have the big fight between, as it's revealed, the Manhunters paid Kanjar-O to create this ruse so that they could draw out the Guardians, so that they could then go attack Oa and steal the Guardians' central power battery that gives all the Green Lanterns rings their power. But that's
convoluted.
all jammed. Like, part 1 is like all prologue to what is a jam-packed, bloated part 2.
Yeah.
And there's some really interesting themes. We talked about this a bit off the air, about like holding those in power accountable, and being able to own up to your mistakes, even if it means you will be punished, even if the punishment seems unfair.
Right.
Owning up to your mistakes. Like, there's something interesting, especially when you look through the superhero lens of that type of topic.
Sure.
But it's like, that's like a tiny little nugget in what is just this really, I can't think of a better word than bloated, part 2 that kind of keeps it from really exploring those themes, at least not to a level that would be satisfactory.
No, I agree completely with you. I gave my score for it was a 4 out of 10 because of that.
Yeah.
I think it had potential, but I think you're right. You're just sitting and you're waiting. There's so much waiting to find out the reveal as to why John didn't go without a fight. Like, they wanted that to be the big reveal at the end of part 1. And I liked what you said before we went on the air. You were talking about how it may have been better if they had done that and done the conviction part and left that as the cliffhanger for part 1. And then part 2 picks up where Superman's investigating, and because it's you're right, it's just so much that's jam-packed into that second part. It felt so rushed. The Manhunters, their plan is completely and totally convoluted, but okay, even if you buy that, they don't get, the one Manhunter becomes the power battery. And it's all of 5 seconds before John figures out that he just has to do the oath to defeat him. It would have been cool that, and we'll talk about it when we look at visuals, but the design for the Manhunter as like the power battery is so cool looking, and he's they gave him a cool voice effect. So it would have been cool to see a battle between him and the Lanterns with maybe weakened rings, or
and the rest of the Justice League as well. Superman versus a giant monster, always a fun time.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It seems like there's a lot of just kind of wasted potential, as you mentioned there. So yeah, my plot score was 3 out of 10. We're getting into Underdwellers territory.
Put a $1 in that.
$1 in the Underdwellers.
Put it in the Underdweller jar.
But it was, like I said, there's interesting ideas here, but I just thought the execution was lacking.
Yeah, they didn't really cover very much of it. All right, let's move on to our next category, Liam. Let's talk music. I got to be honest. So in the very first scene, they used the same like triumphant victory music from when they defeated the Imperium. And I was like, I wonder if that's gonna like. I hadn't noticed that they had done that before on past viewing. So I'm wondering if that's going to become a reoccurring theme. It wasn't just the defeating of the Imperium. But other than that little musical note, and then the very end of part 2 where John does the oath, there wasn't. I noticed some background, but it's not. I don't know, like, because it's not Shirley Walker and it's not very orchestral. Doesn't sound like the live band. It blends into the background more for me.
That's fair,
which is okay. It's not awful. I wasn't offended by it.
No, but
I felt like there could have been more. There's just always more that could be done when there's something that's missing. So I gave music 4 out of 10.
Yeah, I'm right around that same way, and I think I went 5 out of 10 for music personally. Yeah, there's nothing super wrong. I liked the music in the first fight scene on Earth, where Hawkgirl and the Flash and the Martian Manhunter are fighting the Manhunters. I thought that was good, and I like there's kind of that frantic sort of Death Star trench run music comes in a little bit during the final battle in part 2. Mm-hmm. But yeah, overall, nothing to write home about, but not awful or anything either.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Not a lot to talk about there. Let's move on to our animation and visual, Liam. Okay. So we are now. This is technically the 4th and 5th episode if you count Secret Origins as 3 separate episodes. So 4th and 5th episode here of the digital animation age, and it's still getting used to a little bit of it. It wasn't as jarring to me, I think, this time, and some of it was I feel like they didn't use as many painted backgrounds.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of the backgrounds were digitally animated in more parts than... I don't know. I'm just thinking of those scenes in the White Martian's ship and how it just looked very odd, the digital animation juxtaposed to the digital or the painted backgrounds.
Yeah.
So I feel like they did a little bit better job this time blending the two of them together. There was a little bit of off model in the first episode that I noticed when they're beaming Jon Stewart up when the Manhunters capture him. So very weird. Like his face looks all stretched out, very odd. There's also a scene where Superman's flying the javelin. I noticed like the top of his head was it was just oddly shaped. Flash's face kind of looks a little off model in certain places. But overall, balancing that out, there are some cool visuals in this. We already talked about the Manhunter.
Yes.
When he absorbs the power battery, just a cool looking design. He flickers almost like a flame, if you will.
Yeah.
When he grows to the higher or the taller size, he grows larger. And
the power sort of grows from within his metal shell, kind of bursts around him, and this sort of large form kind of grows, as you mentioned, kind of bursts out of the ceiling of the power battery room, and all of the energy draining out of the Guardians and out of Jon's ring. The green comes out of Jon's eyes, which is a really cool, striking visual moment. And that overall fight scene, there's a cool part, Jon phases through a wall and then phases through a Manhunter's face and pulls out his robot brain, basically.
That was super cool. We always talked about how, at least on the original Batman, the animated series, they like to do whatever they could to Scarface.
Yes.
Because they didn't have as many restrictions on what they could do because he's not a human being. So
puppets, robots, anything like that. Toys.
Yep.
Toy man stuff.
So this episode, they take well advantage of that with decapitating, pulling arms off, pulling brains out. Mm-hmm. They take full advantage.
Yeah, they have a lot of fun, and that is probably the most fun visual stuff you see is all in that. The last 6 or 7 minutes of this big battle. It feels like there's a lot of some Star Wars imagery and homages too in there. Yeah. There's a part earlier where Hawkgirl is in a ship chasing Ken Jarro's ship, and they have like a view of her targeting computer that looks like it's right out of the Death Star run from A New Hope. So that some cool little homages. Not as many like alien race cameos, although there was one that you pointed out.
Yeah, so the one that I noticed that stuck out, there was a cameo from the alien that appears at the end of the Last Son of Krypton, that Brainiac, if you remember correctly, there's sort of like a post-credit scene where Brainiac attacks a ship and takes over it, and there are these aliens in it that have these domed helmets, and they're like one eye and sort of a triangular-shaped head. I noticed one of those in the juror, or I guess the crowd that's watching the actual trial take place. And there was maybe one or two other ones. There's a ponytail guy who I can't remember if he was in the Lobo episode or maybe he's late on the War World episode later. Yeah. He might be. But I really thought it was a swing and a miss with some of that, because I felt like that would have been a cool and easy way to disguise some homages, some Easter eggs here or there of either other DC alien races, maybe some foreshadowing with stuff, because there's plenty of episodes that include aliens in this series, or maybe doing your old hide a Marvel character look alike here or there. And there was one that I thought maybe sort of looked like it could have been a Groot-ish type character, but it wasn't very clear if it was, or if I was looking into it. But I felt like they had more opportunity to do some of those, and they kind of swung and a miss. Yeah,
and I'm sure some of that just comes down to time, and you're just like, I just need we need 12 different alien designs,
right?
And which to me suggests, maybe it would have been easier to just look through a couple of books and pull out a character here or there, or do something obscure, like where's my space cabbie cameo here, right? Or something like that. But all things considered, though, visuals are still probably the strongest part of the episode. I gave it 6 out of 10. As you mentioned, there's also just a lot of standing around.
Yeah.
Like during the trial bits, and they kind of try to intercut it with Hawkgirl has like a barroom brawl.
I like the brawl scene. That to me, the animation from that looked cool. There was a couple like where she hurls the one Green Lantern towards Kilowog and he catches him.
Yes, Gallius.
And when he throws Gallius towards Green Lantern, he catches him, and you get Arcus Chummock, I believe it is, who turns around and looks, and then he looks back, and then you get the shot of Hawkgirl pulling back,
like a real POV shot of
hammering him in the face. That was kind of cool. I like that shot. And there is some fighting in the first episode when they first land the ship. But like you said, yeah, and that kind of goes back to plot, I think, and why we gave plot maybe not as high a score, is just because it is a lot of standing around listening to accusations being made and John being super depressed.
Yes. and you got that intercut with some Flash comic relief and but yeah, it's overall it's just it's like I said, it's good, it's not great. I think that's fair. So my score is 6 out of 10.
Mine was also a very, very, very similar exact 6 out of 10, which if you've never listened to us before, you'd be shocked to know that we rarely agree. It's rarely agree. Do we agree here on the podcast? Just kidding, of course. But yeah, I think too, it would have served them better to have a longer battle scene at the end. There could have been some more. Yeah. There are a few cool visuals in there, and of course, as one of the main complaints of some of the people that have watched and fans of Justice League would tell you, some of their issues with this incarnation of John as Green Lantern is he didn't do a lot of constructs with his rings, and the lanterns in this episode, the small portion that we see them fighting, there's no constructs.
Nope.
It's a lot of green beams. And I know there was interviews of the creators of Bruce Timm and talking about that about those complaints, and I have to wonder. I don't remember them saying it was because of animating was more difficult, but you'd think that it's easier to animate a green beam than it is.
And some of that I think is they and I think they mentioned they did kind of want to establish John as such a like militaristic, like straight-laced guy. Mm-hmm. That he wouldn't make, the same type of constructs that like a Kyle Rayner, who was a cartoonist and an artist. But that's one of the cooler visual parts of any Green Lantern, if you've ever read a Green Lantern comic book, is the different weapons he makes. But even that, like, he doesn't make any guns to then shoot the beams.
Right.
Or, like, later on you see him in the series, he'll make, like, giant hands or a sword or something, and that's, I think, maybe more what people were looking for.
Sure.
It's not super visually interesting. It's just, green laser beam.
Green circle.
Right, green bubble when he's transporting people.
Even the shield that he creates is just like a block.
It's just like a square, and it gets shot through, and then it kind of looks like Swiss cheese. But,
right.
But yeah, overall, it's Green Lantern in Season 1 of Justice League, at least so far, is not a super visually interesting character, except for the end here where he does the oath and absorbs all of the energy back into his own ring,
and
then fires it back out to recreate the power battery. That's a pretty striking visual.
Yeah, that was good too.
So yeah, definitely I think visuals are one of the strongest parts of the episode.
Absolutely. All right, let's move on to our final category, Liam, and that, of course, is voice acting. I know we have a few special guests. One of them we recognize right off the bat. I believe he's the first voice you hear at the beginning of the episode. But tell us about some of our surprise special guests this week.
So, as you mentioned, Kurtwood Smith plays the prosecutor, the alien prosecutor, who most people would know as Red on that 70s show,
Red Foreman.
The Dad,
yep.
on that 70s show. I was waiting for him to call Green Lantern a dumbass, but we never got that.
Yeah, also, of course, from he was in RoboCop.
Correct.
And
one of the Star Trek movies, I believe.
He's been in a lot. He's been a lot of.
He's
things.
Been around a long time. I think it's fun. I'm sure it's funny for someone like him who's been around for as long as he has to then be known as the guy who says dumbass. But it is what everyone I think thinks about when they hear that voice. Certainly, it was what we thought of. We also have James Remar playing the lead Manhunter, who is probably more famous later on in Justice League Unlimited. He plays both Hawkman and the Shadow Thief. A little foreshadowing.
Yeah, a little foreshadowing. There you go.
in more ways than one.
Yeah.
And also voiced the Black Mask on The Batman. Did voices on Brave and the Bold. Played Two-Face on that show. So real DC animation veteran.
Yep.
Does a fine job. It's not. It's sort of just the Manhunters are sort of just described as like an artificial intelligence, like hive mind,
Right.
that got mad. Like, it's not really exactly clear. I mean, they kind of explain they were originally, just like in the comics, were the original protectors of the universe,
Right.
pre-Lantern Corps, and then the Guardians basically demoted them to like security, and they got mad, and so they hatched this evil plot. But I thought like Remar does a good job as the lead guy. And,
Yeah, he's fine. He's robotic enough,
right?
And I think I guess we'll be able to see it later on when we review the episode where he plays Hawkman. But you think he's better at? It's weird to say he's better as a robotic voice. I think he comes across with more emotion than he does as a human or even alien human-esque creature.
Yeah, I'll definitely be curious to check that out as we go forward here. But a few other ones. Kandra Rowe, I'm probably going to butcher this last name, but his name is René Auberjonois. It's very French.
Yes.
Auberjonois,
Yeah,
I'm going to go with. But he was Paul on Boston Legal, the sort of angry old man shaking his fists at the antics of James Spader and William Shatner on that show.
There you go.
And also voiced a few other characters, including Kirk Langstrom's father-in-law on
Dr. March.
Dr. March on the original animated series Batman. So another DC voice acting veteran there.
There you go.
And then we have one Dennis Haysbert as
There you
Kilowog, who you might know from Allstate commercials, or also as the president on 24, and several other acting roles.
There you go.
He was sort of the one recognizable voice. I think most of the other Green Lantern Corps were just voiced by other members of the cast. I think Renee played Gallius, and Michael Rosenbaum was Arcus.
Yeah.
And the other two didn't talk. So.
Right. Yeah. What did you? I mean, I thought. It's difficult. Red Foreman is such an iconic voice, but I don't think it was cast in a bad way. Like I thought he did a fantastic job as the prosecutor.
Yeah.
But there wasn't a whole lot that was asked of the other special guests other than Dennis Haysbert, who has a somewhat larger role in part 2. But even that, like, it was just kind of like, oh, that sounds like the guy from the Allstate commercials.
Yeah.
Oh, it is. So the main cast was relied upon a lot in this episode, despite having a few supporting characters that are a little more well known.
Yeah.
I didn't think there was anything terrible. I thought John will get better. Phil Lamar as John Stewart will get better, but you began to see, he gets much better, I think, as the series goes on. But I think even here you can see that he's pretty darn good.
He's got something to sink his teeth into. Obviously, in Secret Origins, he only had a few lines, and he was sort of very much the straight-laced guy. So seeing him interact with his old neighbors and stuff at the beginning of part 1, through they begin to establish the dynamic of him and the Flash, which becomes very the sort of buddy cop stuff that plays out through the rest of the series, and their sort of relationship of Wally being such a jokester and kind of an idiot, and John being so straight laced and trying to get him to take everything seriously. And so they start to sort of play off that dynamic a little bit. I didn't think this was Maria Kanellis' best episode as Hawkgirl.
No, I totally agree with you.
And I definitely think, and I know, because I've watched Justice League Unlimited, I've watched certainly Star-Crossed or something later on, and in maybe even episodes later on in season 1. But she has a lot of dialogue, and she's just like the one note is that Hawkgirl is like keeps jumping into fights, and like Superman has to keep like chastising her because we're not here to fight, we're here to help John. So it's kind of a one note thing, but outside of that, I definitely think Phil Lamar is the strongest of all the voice the voice actors here as far as our main cast go. Michael Rosenbaum does a fine job as
he's fine.
He's basically, again, in this episode, just called on to be comic relief and not much more.
Agreed.
And again, you'll get a little bit more serious Flash or a little more character development as to why he's more of a lighter character as the series go on.
Yeah.
But yeah, overall, I also gave voice acting 6 out of 10. I think it's good. I don't think it's great. And there's one other thing in voice acting which I'll get to maybe a little bit later. But overall, there wasn't like other than Phil's performance getting to sink his teeth into a little more depth of his character. I didn't think there was a really like strong performance.
Yeah, I'm shockingly I agree with you. I think there was some okay stuff here, but nothing that blew me away. Wasn't really offended by anything. Didn't think anything necessarily brought the episode down, except for Hawkgirl. I felt like that it was difficult for her to show, and some of it is the character, I think, itself, because they try to make it very obvious that she's a cold character, wants to fight, does not care much about hurting people, doesn't quite understand, I think, is the other like the flip side of that, like understand because she's an alien that comes from a war planet, that what compassion is, or what grace or mercy or any of that stuff is. So
she fights to win, she fights to kill,
right? And she fights to fight, and there's like that's her go-to, that's her first choice, and her second choice is like fight. Like not fighting is barely like option number 3. So, with that said, it was a little bit. I think it brought it down just a little bit. It was a little bit robotic in this episode, at least. So I gave voice acting a 5 out of 10. All right, Liam. So there we go. It's the bonus point sound effect. Liam, it's not me, so it must be you.
It must be me. Yeah, I wanted to give 1 extra point because this is the first time in the series that we hear Phil LaMarr do the full Green Lantern oath. And it's tremendous.
In brightest day, in blackest night, no evil shall escape my sight. Who worship evil's might, beware my power, Green Lantern's light.
Yeah, wasn't that great?
Tremendous.
Super good. He's so awesome at that, and obviously, again, this isn't necessarily his best episode. It's not really anybody's best episode, but that moment as sort of the iconic first time we get to see him do that. And again, it's just another little connection to the larger DC world. Is that Green Lantern oath? If you've ever read a Green Lantern comic, it's so prevalent.
Absolutely,
it's so important to that character, and having him save the day by doing his oath and sort of his never die attitude. I thought it all just comes out in that performance, and as something as simple as just repeating these few lines that I've read in a comic 100 times, in his voice, in Phil LaMarr's Jon Stewart voice, it's just perfect. So I had to throw out an extra point just for that.
I gotcha. Very good. All right, Liam. So I think that brings us to our final scores. Brings my final score as a total of 19 out of 40, which is definitely on the lower end of things regarding, I think, probably the lowest score we've had in quite a while for an episode.
Yeah.
Maybe Heroes was even in the 20s, made it to the 20s for me, 21, 22. But from Batman Beyond, so didn't break the 20 mark, so not a great episode overall. I think that if you're rewatching Justice League, this to me, it's right on the line of see it, skip it.
Yeah,
I think you could skip past it, and you're not going to miss a whole lot.
I would say if you're not super familiar with the Green Lantern as a whole, as a character. Beyond, he's a guy with a ring. This does delve into the Guardians and the Corps itself and some of that. So, I mean, there's stuff worth it if you're pretty familiar with these characters and concepts, you can probably skip this one. So my final score was a completely different 21 out of 40.
Okay.
So a little bit of a difference.
You broke 20.
Yeah.
So
yeah. So I didn't have a terrible time watching this. Or
no, anything. It wasn't. It didn't feel like a burden to watch it.
No.
But it just wasn't. it wasn't great.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think you're going to find some of those when you review as many episodes as we already have and as many as we will.
Absolutely.
There's going to be some that are just fine.
That's okay. All right, man. All right, so guess it's time to wrap things up. Thank you, everybody, for listening to this week's episode. As always, make sure you check out our website, DCAUreview.com. That is where you can hear episodes streaming brand new every Saturday, most Saturdays, I would say, at 10 a.m.
Yes, we also have our Twitter account. You can follow us at DCAU Review. Make sure you go and look at the pinned tweet on our Twitter account. Mm-hmm. We are doing a contest. We're trying to get ourselves to 250 followers, at which point you will be able to tweet us the secret word.
The secret word from last week, which was, Liam?
It was Martian.
That is Martian.
So, so if you go up, if you like and retweet the pinned tweet on our Twitter, you are already entered to win the contest. And then, like I said, once we get to 250 followers, all we got to do is tweet us that secret word. We'll get to that down the line.
Yep.
But in the meantime, feel free to tweet us anytime with any sort of thoughts you have on the episodes we're reviewing, past episodes that we reviewed, as you mentioned, at DCAUreview.com. We have archives. You can search by villain. You can search by show. You can look. We've now done at least a couple of episodes on all 4 of the main shows.
Yep.
We got some cool stuff coming up as well. Some Elseworld stuff that may be coming up around the holidays.
Super excited about that.
Yeah, it's going to be dope. And, just overall, Twitter's definitely the number one way to get in touch with us, though. If you have thoughts on the episodes, what we should review next, tag us in fan art. We love seeing that stuff, too.
Yep.
Any kind of interaction that you would like to have with us or anyone else in our little DCAU community. It's a really cool thing to be a part of, and we enjoy it.
Definitely. All right. So, I'm Cal.
And I'm Liam.
And we will talk to you on next week's episode of DCAU Review.
Goodbye.